The creatures came in the night, though night and day held little meaning in the vacuum of space. They came through ventilation shafts in cargo holds, through maintenance tunnels in recycling ports. They came by the thousands, released simultaneously across 17 human colonies, 43 space stations, and 112 deep space vessels. The Kytharii Dominion had spent 6 years engineering them, another 2 years breeding them in secret facilities, and exactly 37 minutes deploying them across human space. They called them Raxlings. Captain Davin Harrington was drinking coffee in his quarters aboard the UHSV Perseverance when the first screams echoed through the ship's corridors. He was a compact man in his early 40s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent more time fixing problems than creating them. The coffee mug shattered against the deck as he lunged for his communicator, but Commander Lucas Brennerman's voice was already crackling through the ship-wide channel. All hands combat stations. We have multiple hostile contacts, decks 3 through 9. Repeat, hostile contacts. They're small, fast, and they're everywhere. Harrington was running before Brennerman finished speaking, his mind already cataloging possibilities. Pirates didn't work like this. Boarding parties didn't work like this. Whatever was happening aboard the Perseverance was something new, and in his 22 years of service, new usually meant bad. The first body he found was Ensign Tally, slumped against a bulkhead on deck 5 with 3 parallel gashes across his throat. The blood was still warm. Harrington knelt beside him, checking for a pulse he knew he wouldn't find when he heard the sound. It was a chittering, almost insectoid, but with an underlying mammalian quality that set his teeth on edge. He turned slowly, hand moving to the plasma pistol at his hip, and saw them. There were 5 of them, each roughly the size of a large house cat, but built like nightmare fuel. Their bodies were sleek and muscular, covered in scales that shifted between gray and black depending on the light. 6 legs ending in curved claws that looked sharp enough to punch through hull plating. A wedge-shaped head with too many eyes, arranged in a pattern that provided nearly 360-degree vision, and a mouth that split their face almost in half, revealing rows of needle-like teeth glistening with something that definitely wasn't saliva. They stared at him. He stared back. Then they charged. Harrington fired 3 times, the plasma bolts catching 2 of the creatures mid-leap and sending them tumbling backward in smoking heaps. The other 3 scattered with shocking intelligence, using the corridor's angles and shadows like trained soldiers. One came at him low, while another launched itself from a wall panel, and Harrington realized with cold certainty that these things hunted in packs, with coordination, with strategy. He caught the low one with a kick that sent it sprawling, but the wall jumper landed on his back, claws digging through his uniform jacket and into flesh. Harrington slammed himself backward into the bulkhead, once, twice, until he felt the creature's grip loosen and heard the satisfying crunch of its body hitting metal. It dropped, dazed but alive, and he put a bolt through its head before it could recover. The 5th one had vanished. Harrington pressed his hand to his shoulder, feeling the warm wetness of blood, and activated his comm. "Bridge, this is the captain. What's our status?" Brennerman's voice came back strained. "We've got reports coming in from all decks, sir. Best estimate is 40 to 50 hostiles aboard. Medical is overwhelmed. We've lost 17 crew so far, another 33 injured. And, Captain, we're getting similar reports from every ship in the fleet, every station. It's coordinated." "This is an invasion," Harrington said quietly. "Someone just invaded all of human space at once." "Yes, sir. And they used these things to do it." Harrington looked down at the dead creatures, their strange bodies already stiffening. Whoever had made them had done so with purpose. The claws were positioned for climbing in zero-gravity environments. The multiple eyes provided vision in the low-light conditions common on ships. Even the body size was calculated, large enough to be deadly, small enough to access virtually any space on a vessel. These weren't animals. These were weapons. "Get me a line to Fleet Command," Harrington ordered, "and find me someone who knows xenobiology. I want to know what we're dealing with." Dr. Petra Whitmore was trapped in her laboratory on Deck 7, and she had approximately 4 minutes to live. She'd calculated this based on the speed at which the 3 creatures circling her workspace were testing the makeshift barricade she'd constructed from equipment crates. They'd already found 2 weak points and were working on a 3rd. They were learning. That was the part that terrified her most. Petra was a xenobiologist by training and a chronic optimizer by nature. At 36, she'd published more papers on exobiology than most researchers produced in their entire careers. She understood alien life the way some people understood music or mathematics, intuitively, almost instinctively. And right now, her instincts were screaming that something about these creatures didn't add up. The way they moved suggested predatory intelligence, yes, but there was something else. Something in the way they paused occasionally, tilting their heads, almost as if listening to instructions. The way they coordinated their attacks without any visible communication. This wasn't just pack behavior. This was something engineered. One of the creatures, she'd mentally labeled it Alpha because she was going to die anyway and might as well use proper nomenclature, made another rush at the barricade. Its claws caught on the gap between two crates, and for just a moment, it was stuck. The other two creatures didn't immediately move to help. Instead, they hung back, watching, assessing. They were letting Alpha test the defenses. That meant hierarchy. That meant social structure. And if Petra knew anything about social creatures, it was that they responded to patterns, to consistency, to rewards. She looked down at the emergency ration bar in her pocket. It was supposed to be her dinner. Now it might be her salvation. The creatures had broken through somewhere on Deck 4 and probably entered through life support. That meant they'd been deployed in space, probably hours ago, possibly days. If they'd been waiting in the cold and dark, they'd be hungry. Engineered creatures still needed food. Petra unwrapped the ration bar slowly, quietly, while the three creatures continued probing her defenses. Then she broke off a piece and threw it past the barricade into the center of the lab. All three creatures froze. Alpha approached first, sniffing the air with rapid, shallow movements, its multiple eyes fixed on the piece of ration bar. Then, with surprising delicacy, it picked up the food and consumed it. The other two creatures, Beta and Gamma, Petra decided, immediately moved toward Alpha with what looked like aggressive intent. Alpha turned, made a low clicking sound, and the other two stopped. Not retreated, just stopped, waiting. "Oh," Petra whispered. "Oh, that's fascinating." Alpha was dominant, but dominance in a social structure meant rules. It meant predictable behavior. It meant she might possibly survive the next 4 minutes after all. She broke off 2 more pieces and tossed them toward Beta and Gamma. They approached cautiously, watching Alpha for any sign of aggression. When none came, they ate. Petra waited exactly 30 seconds, then threw another 3 pieces. The creatures ate again, but this time they looked toward her after finishing. Their multiple eyes tracked her movements with unsettling precision. She threw 3 more pieces. The creatures ate, then sat. Actually sat, like trained dogs waiting for the next command. "Okay," Petra said aloud, her voice shaking only slightly. "Okay, we're doing this. We're actually doing this." She spent the next hour feeding them in careful intervals, gradually moving the food closer to the barricade, then beside it, then finally on top of it. The creatures followed the food, and somewhere during that hour they stopped being immediate threats and became subjects of study. When Captain Harrington finally reached her lab with a security team, they found Dr. Petra Whitmore sitting on the floor with 3 of the creatures curled up within arm's reach, chirping softly as she took notes on her datapad. "Doctor," Harrington said carefully, his weapon trained on the creatures. "Step away from them, slowly." "No," Petra replied, not looking up from her notes. "Captain, these creatures are displaying complex social behaviors. They're food-motivated, hierarchy-driven, and capable of learning. They were engineered to kill us, yes, but they were also engineered to infiltrate human spaces, which means they're naturally adapted to human environments. Do you understand what that means? It means they're dangerous. It means they're domesticable." Harrington stared at her. "Doctor, those things have killed 31 of my crew." "I know, and I'm sorry. But Captain, they killed because that's what they were designed to do. We can redesign their purpose. We can redirect their behaviors. We can..." One of the creatures, Alpha, made a chirping sound and nudged its head against Petra's leg. She absently scratched behind what might have been its ear. "Sweet, merciful stars," Brennerman muttered from behind Harrington. "She's petting it. Vah!" "Yes," Petra said, "I am. And if you give me 72 hours and your permission to establish protocols, I can teach the rest of your crew to do the same. We can turn this invasion into an opportunity. We can survive this not by fighting these creatures, but by befriending them. Harrington lowered his weapon slowly. He'd spent 2 decades in space learning to trust his instincts, and his instincts were currently at war with his common sense. Common sense said, shoot the monsters. Instinct said this woman had just survived an hour alone with 3 predators and turned them into something resembling pets. 72 hours, he said finally. But the moment one of them attacks someone following your protocols, we space every single creature on this ship. Understood? Petra smiled. Understood, Captain. Though I don't think that's going to be a problem. She was right. Within a week, 16 of the 17 creatures still aboard the Perseverance had bonded with crew members. The 17th had to be euthanized after it attacked engineer Tessa Calloway, but Petra's subsequent analysis revealed it had been suffering from a genetic defect that caused aggression spirals. The others showed no such issues. Within 2 weeks, similar reports were coming in from across human space. The creatures, officially designated as Raxlings by United Human Systems Xenobiology Division, were being successfully socialized in 73% of cases. Aggressive individuals were being quarantined and studied. Docile ones were being trained, fed, and increasingly named. Within 3 weeks, the first video went viral. Private Joran Casterly was 19 years old, had joined the military to pay for university, and had lost 2 friends during Swarm Day. He'd volunteered for Petra's socialization program, partly because Captain Harrington ordered it, and partly because he wanted to prove to himself that he could stand in the same room as the creatures that had killed Mendez and Cho without losing his mind. The Raxling assigned to him was a small male, slightly undersized compared to the others, with scales that shifted to a lighter gray when it was calm. It had developed a habit of stealing Joran's snack bars from his bunk, eating half and leaving the rest in increasingly creative hiding places around his quarters. Joran named it Snippet because it kept taking snippets of his food, and because naming something made it real, made it his responsibility, made it harder to hate. Snippet learned to recognize Joran's footsteps and would chirp excitedly when he entered their shared quarters. Snippet learned to play fetch with a magnetic ball in the zero-gravity sections of the ship. Snippet learned to curl up on Joran's chest during sleep cycles, purring, which no one expected, as Joran absently stroked its scales. And Joran, processing his grief and rage and confusion in the way his generation always did, recorded a video of Snippet chasing the magnetic ball through the ship's recreation deck, bouncing off walls with zero-gravity grace, and posted it to RaxTok with the caption, "My murder machine learned a trick, your move, universe." The video received 15 million views in the first 6 hours. By the end of the day, RaxTok was flooded with similar content, Raxlings in zero gravity doing loops, Raxlings wearing makeshift sweaters knitted by crew members who needed something to do with their hands, Raxlings learning to navigate obstacle courses, Raxlings sleeping in improbable positions, Raxlings attempting to understand their own reflections, Raxlings demonstrating the intelligence everyone was beginning to realize they possessed. Humanity, having survived an extinction-level attack, responded by turning their attempted murderers into internet celebrities. In the obsidian council chambers of Keth Prime, Dominus Curath vel Kethir watched the videos with mounting disbelief that gradually crystallized into pure incandescent rage. The Kytharii were an old species, having achieved interstellar travel while humans were still building pyramids. They were insectoid in basic structure, exoskeletons, compound eyes, mandibles that clicked when they spoke, but possessed a sophistication and technological advancement that placed them among the galaxy's elite powers. They had conquered 17 species, absorbed 9 others through cultural dominance, and established a dominion that stretched across 42 star systems. They did not lose. They especially did not lose to mammals who barely understood quantum mechanics and still consumed organic matter like primitives. Korath's primary manipulators twitched with agitation as another video played across the holographic display. A human youngling, they were called children, he reminded himself, was giggling as a Raxling attempted to climb a vertical surface and repeatedly slid down, making sounds that the translation software interpreted as frustration vocalizations. The comments beneath the video were worse. Thousands of humans posting their own experiences, sharing training advice, comparing their Raxlings' personalities. Personality. They were ascribing personality to weapons. "Explain this," Korath demanded, his voice producing the harmonic frequencies that indicated command-level discourse in Kytharii society. "Explain how our ultimate weapon has become their entertainment." General Threxus Mol Karan, his military strategist, and increasingly his political rival, settled his bulk onto the speaking platform. Threxus was older than Korath by nearly a decade, with scarring across his exoskeleton that spoke of battles fought with honor. He'd opposed the Raxling program from the beginning, advocating for conventional military superiority instead of biological warfare. Now, watching their carefully designed invasion collapse into humiliating farce, he radiated the Kytharii equivalent of vindication. "The humans are social creatures, Dominus, more social than we anticipated. Our intelligence suggested they would fragment under pressure, each individual seeking survival at the expense of their collective. We were wrong. The Raxlings were designed specifically to exploit human weaknesses," Korath insisted. "Their fear response, their inferior reflexes, their soft bodies, every aspect was calibrated for maximum lethality against their biology." "Yes," Threxus agreed, "but we failed to account for their psychology. Humans do not merely coexist with other species, they bond with them. They have done this throughout their history. They domesticated wolves into dogs. They befriended horses, cats, birds, even some reptilian species on their homeworld. When presented with a creature that can interact with them, that can learn, that displays any social behavior whatsoever, humans apparently attempt to integrate it into their social structure." Korath's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "This is not possible. The Raxlings killed thousands of them." "And they killed thousands of us in the Colaris campaign," Threxus countered. "Yet we did not domesticate them. We did not turn them into pets. We fought them, defeated them, and moved on. Humans appear to function differently. They survive threats not by eliminating them, but by incorporating them." Another video appeared on the display, this one showing a human in military uniform. The translation identified him as Private Joran Casterly of the UHSV Perseverance, teaching his Raxling to respond to verbal commands. The creature was responding, learning, obeying. "This is unacceptable," Korath stated. "The Galactic Council will use this as evidence of our aggression. Our carefully planned expansion into human space is now compromised by their bizarre perversion of our weapon. We must act." "I would advise caution, Dominus. The humans have not yet responded militarily. They are, by all accounts, focused on managing the Raxling situation. If we allow time for diplomatic—" "No." Korath's voice carried the harmonic that ended discussion. "We spent 8 years developing the Raxlings. We invested resources equivalent to 3 planetary mining operations. We designed them perfectly. The failure is not in our weapon. The failure is in our deployment. We will try again." Threxus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his tones carried the careful modulation of someone addressing a superior who was making a catastrophic mistake. "Dominus, the humans have turned our weapon into their companions. Any further aggression will not be seen as military action. It will be seen as an attack on their families." "They are animals," Korath said dismissively. "Weapons, tools. The humans are simply too primitive to understand this." "Perhaps," Threxus replied, "or perhaps we are too rigid to understand them." Ambassador Nilith Sortamaris of the Selkathi delegation had been a member of the Galactic Council for 16 years and had presided over countless disputes, territorial negotiations, and trade disagreements. She'd mediated wars, prevented genocides, and once successfully negotiated a peace treaty between 2 species who communicated via incompatible sensory methods. She had never, in all that time, dealt with anything quite like the Raxling situation. The council chambers aboard the Verdant Accord, a massive station positioned in neutral space, were designed to accommodate 48 different species simultaneously, with atmosphere, gravity, and lighting customized for each delegation's comfort. The Selkathi, being aquatic, occupied a sealed environment filled with water, their sleek bodies undulating gracefully as they moved through their space. Nilith was reviewing the latest reports from human space when Envoy Corvin Zel Mishor entered her chamber, his translator device active. Ambassador, the Kytharii have submitted a formal complaint. They're demanding that humans immediately exterminate all Raxlings as dangerous biological weapons. Nihilith had expected this. The Kytharii didn't handle humiliation well. Their rigid hierarchical culture struggled with anything that didn't conform to their expected patterns. And the human response? They've declined, quite firmly. Their official statement argues that the Raxlings, when properly socialized, pose no greater threat than any other predatory species that humans have historically domesticated. They've submitted extensive behavioral data to support this claim. Nihilith accessed the data stream, her primary optical sensors processing the information. The human research was thorough, she had to admit. Bite incident rates among socialized Raxlings were actually lower than several Earth-native species that humans kept as pets. Aggression markers decreased significantly after bonding. Cognitive testing suggested intelligence comparable to Earth dolphins or corvids. The humans have essentially domesticated them, she observed. In 3 months, yes. That's remarkable. The Kytharii find it offensive. Nihilith rippled with what humans would interpret as amusement. I imagine they do. We'll need to convene a full council session. This situation requires official documentation and likely new protocols. Using biological warfare against a species is already illegal under 17 council regulations. The fact that the target species then befriended said biological warfare is unprecedented. There's another complication, Corvin added. The humans are requesting that Raxlings be classified as a protected species under their guardianship. They want full legal rights to custody, breeding programs, and conservation efforts. They're treating them like endangered animals. Yes, Ambassador. They're treating their attempted murderers like endangered animals. Nihilith was silent for a moment, considering the implications. The Galactic Council operated on principles of logic, consistency, and established precedent. Humans consistently violated all three simply by existing in their own peculiar way. Schedule the session, she decided, and Corvin, ensure the Kytharii understand that any further aggression toward human space will be met with council sanctions. They started this. The humans are simply finishing it in their own strange way. Understood, Ambassador. After Corvin left, Nihilith pulled up one of the viral videos, a human infant, barely capable of walking, giggling as a Raxling gently groomed its hair with surprising delicacy. The creature that had been designed to kill was now displaying nurturing behavior toward its intended victim's offspring. Nihilith had studied hundreds of species across her career. She understood pack dynamics, mutualistic relationships, symbiotic evolution. But humans remained consistently, frustratingly, fascinatingly inexplicable. They survived by befriending their threats. They turned their fears into their families. It was, she reflected, perhaps the most dangerous survival strategy in the galaxy. Because you couldn't fight an enemy who refused to see you as one. 6 months after Swarm Day, Raxlings were everywhere in human society. Forge Station Meridian, orbiting the mining colonies of the Cressida Belt, had become something of a cultural hub for human Raxling integration. The station housed 43,000 permanent residents and, at last count, nearly 9,000 Raxlings. They'd become part of daily life, small-scaled shadows accompanying their humans through corridors, participating in work routines, and in some cases, serving crucial functions. Tessa Calloway, who'd nearly died during the initial attack aboard the Perseverance, now worked as a senior engineer at Meridian. The Raxling that had attacked her, before it was euthanized, had been suffering from severe neurological damage, something the initial batches of creatures apparently experienced due to rushed genetic engineering. The Raxling she'd eventually bonded with, a female she'd named Cypher, had proven invaluable for maintenance work. Cypher could squeeze into spaces too small for human engineers, could sense electromagnetic fields that indicated faulty wiring, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict equipment failures. Tessa suspected it had something to do with vibration sensitivity, or possibly quantum-level perception that humans simply didn't possess. Whatever it was, Cypher had prevented 3 major system failures in the last month alone. "Good girl," Tessa murmured, as Cypher emerged from a maintenance shaft, carrying a corroded relay in her mouth. "See, I told you something was wrong in there. Cypher chirped, dropped the relay at Tessa's feet and immediately returned to the shaft. She was methodical like that, thorough. Tessa had learned to trust her instincts. Throughout Meridian, similar stories played out. Raxlings working in medical facilities, their acute senses detecting chemical changes that indicated patient distress before monitors registered problems. Raxlings in security, their pack-hunting instincts redirected toward protective behavior. Raxlings in therapy programs, their simple presence providing comfort to humans dealing with PTSD from Swarm Day. Private Joran Casterly, now promoted to corporal and stationed at Meridian, had become something of a celebrity. His RaxTok channel had 50 million followers. He posted daily videos of Snippet learning new tasks, playing with other Raxlings, or simply existing in that peculiar way that made millions of humans smile. The psychological impact was significant. Humans who'd lost loved ones during Swarm Day found themselves working through grief by caring for the very creatures that had caused that grief. It was paradoxical, uncomfortable, and profoundly human. Dr. Petra Whitmore, now heading the xenobiology department at Meridian, was finalizing her research paper on Raxling domestication when the alarms began. The sound was different from the Swarm Day alarms, deeper, more sustained. This wasn't a biological threat, this was military. Petra's communicator activated before she could reach for it. Captain Harrington's voice, tense and controlled, filled her lab. Dr. Whitmore, we have multiple contacts entering the system. Kytharii fleet composition, 15 heavy cruisers, 37 support vessels. They're broadcasting demands for Meridian's surrender and the immediate extermination of all Raxlings aboard the station. Petra felt Cypher press against her leg, sensing her distress. Around the lab, 3 other Raxlings, research subjects who'd become permanent residents, raised their heads, suddenly alert. They're doing it again, she said quietly. They're attacking the civilians. Yes, Harrington confirmed. And doctor, they've deployed something else. Scan data indicates biological signatures consistent with Raxlings, but larger, enhanced. They're calling them Mark II units. Petra's mind raced through possibilities, all of them bad. The Kytharii had learned from their first failure. They'd engineered new creatures, probably more aggressive, possibly resistant to domestication protocols. And they were deploying them here, at Meridian, where thousands of families lived with thousands of bonded Raxlings. Captain, the domesticated Raxlings will defend their territories. If these Mark II units are perceived as threats, I know, we're evacuating civilians to the core sections. Military personnel are taking defensive positions. But doctor, I need you to understand something. The Kytharii just made a critical mistake. What's that? Harrington's voice carried an edge Petra had never heard before. Not anger, something colder. They attacked our families, they attacked our pets, and humanity does not respond well to that. The battle for Forge Station Meridian began at 2:17 p.m. station time and became the inflection point of what historians would later call the Kytharii conflict. The Mark II Raxlings deployed from Kytharii boarding craft were indeed larger, roughly twice the mass of the original Raxlings, with enhanced musculature, reinforced claws, and what appeared to be minor armor plating along their spines. They'd been designed to be aggressive, territorial, and completely resistant to the domestication protocols that had doomed the Mark I units. The Kytharii had learned their lesson. These new creatures would not be befriended. What the Kytharii hadn't anticipated was that the original Raxlings had learned lessons too. The first Mark II unit breached into Section 7, a residential area where 300 humans lived with their bonded Raxlings. It encountered a human family, mother, father, 2 children, and prepared to attack with single-minded aggression. It never got the chance. The family's 2 bonded Raxlings, responding to threat markers they'd learned from months of integration with human security protocols, attacked first. They moved in coordinated patterns that the Mark II unit, for all its enhanced aggression, couldn't match. They knew the corridors, knew the angles, knew exactly how to use the environment to their advantage because they'd been living here, playing here, existing here for months. The Mark II unit fell within 30 seconds, overwhelmed by opponents who fought not from programming, but from learned behavior and territorial imperative. Throughout Meridian, similar encounters played out. The Mark II units were stronger, yes, But the Mark I Raxlings were smarter, better coordinated, and most critically, fighting for something. They were defending their homes, their food sources, their humans. Snippet, Corporal Casterly's celebrity Raxling, took down 3 Mark II units in the span of 4 minutes. The entire incident was captured on his body camera and later went viral with the caption, "They wanted war, they got a very protective pet." But the real battle wasn't between the Raxlings. It was between the Kytharii fleet and the human defense forces, and that battle revealed something the galaxy had been quietly suspecting for years. Humanity had been holding back. Captain Davin Harrington coordinated Meridian's defense from the station's command center, and his tactical decisions reflected decades of military experience suddenly unshackled from diplomatic restraint. The Kytharii expected humans to fight defensively, to prioritize protecting their civilians while slowly mounting a counterattack. Harrington ordered every civilian vessel capable of combat, and there were more than the Kytharii suspected, to arm themselves and form an offensive line. Within minutes, 36 mining ships and cargo haulers revealed weapon systems that had definitely not been included in their registered specifications. Commander Lucas Brennerman, now leading the destroyer UHSV Relentless, coordinated with 7 other human vessels to execute a maneuver that Kytharii strategists would later describe as tactically insane and strategically brilliant. They let the Kytharii fleet advance, appearing to fall back in disarray, then struck from 3 different vectors simultaneously, targeting not the enemy ships, but their communication relays. Without coordination, the Kytharii fleet fragmented. Human ships exploited the gaps with precision that spoke of extensive combat simulations and training that had obviously been conducted, quietly, for years. The Perseverance, with Harrington's former crew and Dr. Whitmore aboard, deployed electronic warfare systems that jammed Kytharii targeting while simultaneously broadcasting something that made several human crew members laugh despite the circumstances. Viral RaxTok videos showing Raxlings playing with human children, learning tricks, sleeping peacefully beside their humans. The psychological warfare was devastating. Kytharii crews, watching their ultimate weapon turned into entertainment, began making tactical errors born from confusion and demoralization. General Threxus, commanding the Kytharii fleet from his flagship, recognized the turning point when it happened. The humans weren't just defending, they were angry. And angry humans, he was discovering, were far more dangerous than desperate ones. "Pull back," he ordered. "All vessels, retreat to Rally Point 7. Dominus Kurath's orders were to take the station, his tactical officer reminded him. "Dominus Kurath isn't here watching his perfect invasion collapse into chaos for a second time. I am. We retreat. Now." The Kytharii fleet disengaged, leaving behind 17 disabled vessels and the scattered remains of their Mark II deployment. Human forces let them go, focusing instead on securing the station and accounting for casualties. The final count was sobering: 43 human deaths, 117 injuries, 68 Raxlings dead, both Mark I and Mark II. But Meridian held. The civilians survived. And across human space, something fundamental shifted. Humanity stopped being diplomatic. Commander Lucas Brennerman stood before the Galactic Council 3 days after the Battle of Meridian, and his statement was broadcast to every member species across Council space. He was not a diplomatic officer. He was a career military commander with a scar across his jaw from a training accident and eyes that had seen too many friends die. He spoke plainly, without political nuance, and that bluntness carried more weight than any carefully crafted speech. The Kytharii Dominion engineered a biological weapon specifically designed to infiltrate human homes and kill human families. When we survived this attack and integrated these creatures into our society, the Kytharii responded by attacking civilian stations where families live, where children play, where people were simply existing with their pets. Brennerman paused, letting the weight of that settle across the council chambers. Humanity has been patient. We have been diplomatic. We have followed council protocols and attempted peaceful resolution. But the Kytharii have now attacked human civilians twice using weapons designed specifically to exploit our biology and our psychology. There will be consequences. Ambassador Nihilith, presiding over the session, rippled with concern. Commander Brennerman, the Council understands human anger, but we must seek peaceful— No, Brennerman interrupted, his voice cutting through the translation matrix with startling clarity. With respect, Ambassador, the time for peace was before the Kytharii deployed weapons into our nurseries. The time for peace was before they attacked stations where grandparents watched their grandchildren play with creatures that were meant to kill them. The Kytharii chose war. Twice. Now they get to see how humans fight when we stop being nice. In the Kytharii section of the council chambers, Dominus Kurath rose to his full height, his exoskeleton gleaming under the station's lights. The humans threaten us before the council itself. This is unacceptable. We demand sanctions against human aggression. You created biological weapons targeting a specific species, Envoy Corvin interjected. That alone violates 43 council regulations. You deployed these weapons without declaration of war. That's another 61 violations, and you attacked civilian populations. Twice. They are mammals, Kurath stated, as if this explained everything. They lack the sophistication to understand proper conflict protocols. Brennerman smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Dominus, we understand conflict just fine. We've been practicing it on each other for thousands of years. The difference is, we usually don't involve children. You did. That was a mistake. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. Humanity is formally withdrawing from all peace negotiations with the Kytharii Dominion. We are establishing military exclusion zones around all human civilian installations. Any Kytharii vessel entering these zones will be considered hostile, and we are informing the Council that human forces will be conducting strategic operations in Kytharii space until such time as reparations are paid and security guarantees are provided. The Council chambers erupted in debate. Ambassador Nyleth attempted to restore order, while Envoy Corvin urgently consulted with other Council members. The Kytharii delegation remained standing, radiating outrage through every movement, and humanity, having issued its warning, began preparing for war. The human counteroffensive was not what the galaxy expected. Traditional military doctrine, as practiced by most species, involved large fleet actions, territorial captures, and gradually escalating force projection. Humanity, drawing on thousands of years of internal conflict, employed something different: surgical strikes targeting infrastructure, psychological warfare, and the systematic dismantling of enemy capability rather than the destruction of enemy forces. Captain Harrington, promoted to admiral and given command of the newly formed 2nd Expeditionary Fleet, led the campaign from the Perseverance. His task force consisted of 48 vessels ranging from heavy cruisers to converted cargo ships, and every single one carried Raxlings as crew members. This was, initially, considered unusual by human command. But Petra Whitmore had advocated for it, and her reasoning was sound. The Raxlings could detect Kytharii pheromone signatures, could navigate spaces too small for humans, and perhaps most importantly, their presence served as a constant reminder to Kytharii forces of their catastrophic miscalculation. The Perseverance's first target was the Kytharii Supply Depot at Vortan 7, a remote outpost that serviced 36 patrol routes. The attack came at 3:42 a.m. local time, using stealth approach vectors that the Kytharii hadn't believed humans possessed. By the time the depot's sensors registered the human ships, it was already over. Harrington didn't destroy the facility. Instead, his forces disabled the communication arrays, captured the supply stockpiles, and left the Kytharii personnel stranded but alive. More significantly, they left behind something else: data packets containing thousands of hours of RaxTok videos, automatically set to play on every screen in the facility. "Let them watch what they created," Harrington told his tactical officer. "Let them see what happened when they tried to weaponize our compassion." The campaign continued with brutal efficiency. Human forces hit communication relays, supply lines, and staging areas across Kytharii outer territories. They avoided civilian populations entirely, but showed no mercy to military infrastructure. Every attack followed the same pattern: disable, capture, demoralize, and leave behind the videos. Within 2 weeks, Kytharii military morale began to fracture. Soldiers who'd been trained to see humans as soft, emotional, and weak were instead facing an enemy that fought with cold precision while simultaneously broadcasting images of the very weapons meant to destroy them, now living peacefully in human homes. The psychological impact was profound. How could you maintain ideological certainty about your enemy's inferiority when they'd turned your ultimate weapon into beloved companions? How could you believe in the superiority of your military when they'd domesticated your most sophisticated bioweapon by teaching it to play fetch? General Threxus watched the deteriorating situation from Keth Prime and knew with absolute certainty that Dominus Curath had led them into disaster. The old general had fought in 17 campaigns and won 14 of them. He understood strategy, logistics, and most critically, he understood when to recognize defeat. He found Curath in the Obsidian Council chambers, reviewing casualty reports with increasing agitation. The Dominus had aged in the past month, his exoskeleton showed stress fractures, his movements were less controlled, and his harmonic voice had developed an unstable quality that indicated psychological strain. "We must sue for peace," Threxus stated without preamble. "The humans have destroyed or captured 48% of our outer military infrastructure. They've disrupted supply lines across 9 systems. And Dominus, our soldiers, are deserting." Impossible. Kytharii do not desert. They are now, because they cannot reconcile what they were taught about humans with what they're experiencing. You told them humans were weak. Instead, they're watching humans fight with calculated efficiency while simultaneously caring for the very creatures we designed to kill them. It breaks their understanding of how conflict works. Curath's mandibles clicked rapidly. The humans are cheating, using psychological manipulation. This is not honorable warfare. There is no such thing as honorable warfare, Dominus. There is only winning and losing. We are losing. Then we escalate. We deploy our reserve fleets. We authorize the use of planetary bombardment weapons. No. Threxus's voice carried harmonics that had not been heard in Kytharii politics for 3 generations. Direct challenge to the Dominus's authority. You will not turn this military failure into genocide. You will not destroy what remains of our reputation in the galaxy by becoming the species that commits planetary destruction because we couldn't accept that mammals outsmarted us. Several other council members chittered agreement. Curath looked around the chamber and saw for the first time complete lack of support. "You are removing me from command," he said quietly. "Yes," Threxus confirmed. "The council has voted. I am assuming emergency leadership until proper succession can be established. And my first act is to open peace negotiations with the humans." Curath could have resisted. He could have called loyal military units, could have attempted to seize control through force. But he was not so far gone that he couldn't recognize political reality. He had led the Kytharii into humiliation twice. His authority was broken. "What will the humans demand?" Curath asked, his voice stripped of its commanding harmonics. "Everything," Threxus replied, "because we gave them every reason to." The peace negotiations took place aboard the Verdant Accord, with Ambassador Nyleth serving as mediator. The human delegation was led by Admiral Harrington and included Dr. Petra Whitmore, whose expertise on Raxlings made her essential to any discussion of their future status. General Threxus represented the Kytharii, accompanied by a diplomatic corps that looked profoundly uncomfortable with their circumstances. The terms presented by Harrington were harsh, but, as Nyleth privately admitted, justified. First, the Kytharii Dominion would completely dismantle all biological weapons programs with verification conducted by Joint Council human inspection teams. Second, all territorial claims within 15 light-years of human space would be ceded to neutral zones under Council protection. Third, reparations would be paid to families affected by both Swarm Day and the Battle of Meridian, with particular attention to those who lost loved ones. Fourth, the Kytharii would formally recognize Raxlings as protected beings under human guardianship, granting humans full legal authority over their breeding, care, and conservation. Fifth, Kytharii military forces would be limited to defensive operations for a period of no less than 20 years, with limitations reviewed annually by the Council. Threxus reviewed the terms with the careful attention of someone who knew he had no negotiating position. The Kytharii had started an illegal war using prohibited weapons against civilian populations. By rights, the Council could have sanctioned them into economic collapse. The human terms were punitive, but survivable. The fourth term, Threxis said carefully, you are claiming ownership of our creation. No, Petra interjected. We're claiming responsibility for their well-being. There's a difference. The Raxlings were engineered to kill, yes, but they're also living beings with social needs, emotional responses, and capacity for growth. You created them as weapons. We're giving them the chance to be something else. They were designed specifically to infiltrate and destroy human populations. And instead, they're helping us heal from the trauma you inflicted, Harrington said. General, here's what you need to understand. Those creatures you made to kill us, they're family now. We name them. We train them. We mourn them when they die. Some of them saved human lives at Meridian by defending against your Mark II units. They're not weapons anymore. They're ours. Threxis was silent for a long moment. Then, in tones that carried genuine curiosity, how do you do it? How do you transform hatred into affection? Petra smiled. We don't transform anything, General. We just recognize that fear and affection aren't opposites. They're both forms of connection. The Raxlings were designed to exploit our tendency to bond with other beings. You thought that was a weakness. It turns out it's our greatest strength. Because once we bond with something, we'll protect it, we'll care for it, we'll fight for it. You didn't create weapons. You created 9,000 reasons for humanity to become invested in survival. That is terrifying, Threxis admitted. Yes, Harrington agreed. It is. The treaty was signed 3 days later. Dominus Curath was formally removed from power and placed under what the Kytharii termed contemplative retirement, which Ambassador Nyleth suspected was roughly equivalent to house arrest. Threxis assumed leadership of the Kytharii Dominion with a mandate to rebuild their diplomatic relationships and economic infrastructure. The war that humanity hadn't wanted but fought with devastating efficiency was over. It had lasted 3 months, caused 12,000 casualties across both sides, and fundamentally altered the galactic perception of human capabilities. They were no longer seen as the soft, emotional mammals who needed Council protection. They were the species that had survived a bioweapon attack by befriending the bioweapons, the species that turned their attempted genocide into a galactic meme, the species that fought wars with surgical precision while broadcasting videos of their pets. Ambassador Nyleth, filing her final report on the conflict, included a note that would be studied by xenosociologists for decades. Humanity's ability to form social bonds with potential threats may be their defining survival characteristic. They do not overcome their enemies through superior force or technology. They overcome them by refusing to accept permanent enmity. This makes them unpredictable, frustrating to negotiate with, and possibly the most dangerous species in Council space, not because of their capacity for violence, but because of their capacity for affection. Captain Davin Harrington retired from military service 6 months after the treaty signing. He was 53, had spent 30 years in uniform, and had developed a persistent tremor in his left hand that medical couldn't fully fix. The doctor said it was stress-related. Harrington said it was time to stop stressing. He bought a small property on Luna, in one of the older settlements where real windows looked out on Earth's blue curve, and established what he initially called a personal project, but what quickly became the Meridian Memorial Sanctuary. The sanctuary housed 48 Raxlings whose bonded humans had died during Swarm Day or the Battle of Meridian. Some were elderly by Raxling standards. The species only lived about 15 years in human care, though research was ongoing. Some were young, confused about why their humans hadn't come back. All of them needed care, structure, and something humans were naturally good at providing: compassion. Harrington spent his days maintaining their habitats, training new behavioral specialists, and occasionally giving interviews to researchers studying the human-Raxling bond. He'd become something of an accidental expert on the subject, having overseen the initial socialization programs aboard the Perseverance. On clear days, he'd sit in the sanctuary's central habitat, a large multi-level structure designed to accommodate Raxling climbing and social behaviors, and watch them interact. They'd developed complex social hierarchies, communication patterns that mixed Kytharii engineering with learned human cues, and individual personalities that still surprised him. One particular Raxling, an aging female named Echo, who'd survived Swarm Day and lost her human at Meridian, had adopted Harrington as her new bonded partner. She was gray around her facial scales now, moved slower than she used to, but still chirped excitedly when he entered the habitat. "Hey, old girl," Harrington murmured, scratching behind her auditory ridges. "How are you feeling today?" Echo purred, pressed against his leg, and made the soft clicking sound that Petra's research had identified as contentment vocalization. She'd been engineered to kill him. Instead, she loved him with the uncomplicated devotion that made Raxling so popular across human space. "Admiral Harrington?" He turned to find a young woman standing at the habitat entrance, holding a data pad nervously. She had the look of a graduate student, enthusiastic, slightly overwhelmed, carrying too much information. "Just Harrington now," he corrected gently. "The Admiral retired. Can I help you?" "I'm Lyra Fentworth, xenosociology doctoral candidate from Luna University. I'm researching the psychological impact of the Raxling integration on human society, and I was hoping I could interview you. You were the first ship captain to implement the domestication protocols." Harrington considered declining. He'd given enough interviews, but something about her earnest enthusiasm reminded him of Dr. Whitmore when she'd first proposed the socialization program, that same belief that understanding could overcome fear. "All right," he said, "but you help me feed them first. They eat at 4 p.m. and Echo here gets cranky if dinner's late." Lyra's face lit up. "I can do that. Thank you, Admiral. Harrington." As they worked together, preparing the specialized diet that human nutritionists had developed for optimal Raxling health, Lyra asked her questions. How did it feel implementing protocols for creatures that had killed his crew? What was the psychological process of moving from fear to care? Did he ever have moments of doubt? Harrington answered honestly. Yes, he'd had doubts. Yes, there were crew members who couldn't overcome their fear and trauma, and that was valid, healthy even. Yes, it had been terrifying to watch his people interact with creatures designed specifically to kill them. "But here's what I learned," he said, watching Echo and 3 other Raxlings play with enrichment toys, puzzle feeders that required problem-solving to access treats. Fear and anger are exhausting. They take energy, constant vigilance, and they don't actually keep you safer. At some point, you have to decide, are you going to spend your life afraid of something, or are you going to understand it? And understanding led to affection. Understanding led to recognition. These creatures were made to be weapons, yes, but they're also alive. They have needs, behaviors, the capacity to learn and change. Once you recognize that, once you see them as beings rather than threats, affection follows naturally, at least for most humans. The Kytharii couldn't understand that, Lyra observed. General Threxus's post-war interviews suggest they still find it incomprehensible, because they see things in hierarchies, dominant and submissive, weapon and target. They couldn't conceive of a relationship that existed outside those categories. Harrington smiled as Echo successfully solved her puzzle feeder and chirped triumphantly. Humans, though, we've been turning predators into partners for thousands of years. It's what we do. Echo brought her puzzle feeder to Harrington, dropping it at his feet with clear expectation. Fill it again. Play the game again. Interact with me. He obliged, resetting the puzzle while she watched with all 8 eyes focused intently on his movements. When he placed it back down, she immediately began working on it, using problem-solving strategies he'd watched her develop over months of practice. "She was designed to kill you," Lyra said softly, "and now she trusts you completely." "Yes," Harrington agreed, "and I trust her. That's the part the Kytharii never understood. Trust isn't weakness. It's the strongest survival strategy we have." Dr. Petra Whitmore received the Xenobiology Excellence Award from the Galactic Council 18 months after the war ended. She accepted it via holographic transmission from her lab on Forge Station Meridian because she was in the middle of a critical research project and couldn't justify the 3-week travel time to the verdant Accord. The project involved mapping the complete behavioral and cognitive profiles of socialized Raxlings across 3 generations. The first generation, the swarm day survivors, were now aging. The second generation, bred in human care, showed fascinating variations from their engineered baseline. And the third generation, barely weaned, were displaying behaviors that suggested the domestication process was accelerating through genetic expression. We're essentially witnessing evolutionary adaptation in real time, Petra explained to her research assistant, a bright young man named Felix Underhill who joined her team specifically to study raxlings. The Kytharii engineered them for aggression, hunting efficiency, and human-specific targeting. But 3 generations of selective breeding and environmental conditioning are producing individuals with enhanced social cognition, reduced aggression markers, and increased neotenic features. They're becoming cuter, Felix translated. Yes, but that's not trivial. Neotenization is a hallmark of domestication across species. Juvenile features trigger caregiving responses in humans, which creates selective pressure for those features to persist into adulthood. The raxlings are literally evolving to be better companions because that's the environmental pressure they're now experiencing. Petra's personal raxlings, she had 3 because of course she did, were the subjects of much of her baseline research. Alpha, the same individual who'd been trapped with her during swarm day, was now elderly and mostly blind, but still insisted on sleeping in her quarters. Beta and Gamma had passed away from age-related complications, mourned as thoroughly as any human would mourn a beloved pet. The new generation, including a young male named Prism for his unusually iridescent scales, showed remarkable cognitive abilities. He could solve problems that first-generation raxlings struggled with, could learn complex multi-step behaviors, and displayed what Petra was carefully documenting as proto-linguistic comprehension. He understands approximately 230 human words, she told Felix, demonstrating by asking Prism to retrieve specific items from around the lab. The raxling responded with near-perfect accuracy. That's comparable to dogs, and we've only had 3 generations of selection. Imagine what 10 generations will produce. The Kytharii created something that will outlast their empire, Felix observed. Yes, they meant to destroy us with these creatures. Instead, they gave us companions that will be part of human society for as long as we exist. It's poetic, really. The door to the lab chimed. Petra looked up to see Corporal Joran Casterly, now wearing civilian clothes, but still recognizable from his countless RaxTok videos. Snippet, grayer around the muzzle and moving with the careful deliberation of an aging raxling, walked beside him. "Dr. Whitmore, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Joran, isn't it? And Snippet, how can I help you?" Joran looked uncomfortable, the way people did when they had to discuss difficult things. "Snippet is 12 years old now. The veterinarians say maybe 2-3 years left if we're lucky. And I've been thinking about what happens after. I've had him since swarm day. He's been with me through 3 promotions, 2 relationships, 1 really bad bout of PTSD. I don't know how to not have him in my life." Petra understood immediately. The first generation of bonded raxlings were reaching end of life, and their humans were facing grief that most of the galaxy didn't comprehend. To lose a pet was painful. To lose a pet that had once been a weapon designed specifically to kill you, that you'd turned into family, that represented survival and healing and the best of what humanity could be. That was something else entirely. "Have you considered the continuation program?" she asked gently. "The breeding program? I looked into it, but I don't want a replacement for Snippet. I want Snippet." "I understand. But the continuation program isn't about replacement. It's about legacy. Snippet could sire offspring that would carry his genetics, his temperament, his specific behavioral traits forward. You wouldn't be replacing him. You'd be ensuring that what made him special continues." Joran was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Snippet's scales. The old raxling purred, leaning into the familiar touch. "Would it be weird?" Joran asked. "Having Snippet's offspring? Would it be weird to honor someone you love by ensuring their legacy continues?" Petra countered. "Humans have been doing that forever. We name children after grandparents. We preserve the work of people we admire. We create traditions that outlast individual lives. This is the same thing, just with a species we've only known for a few years." Snippet made a soft, chirping sound, and Prism, who'd been observing the conversation with typical raxling curiosity, approached cautiously. The two Raxlings touched noses, the younger deferring to the elder in the way that suggested instinctive recognition of status and experience. "Okay," Joran said finally. "Let's do it. Let's make sure there are more Raxlings like Snippet in the world." Petra smiled. "I'll set up the genetic profile and breeding recommendations. And Joran, when the time comes, when Snippet passes, you bring him here. We're establishing a memorial wall for the first generation. They survived an attempted genocide and became family instead. That deserves to be remembered." Private Joran Casterly's journey from traumatized teenager to RaxTok celebrity to advocate for Raxling end-of-life care represented something larger happening across human society. The creatures that had killed thousands were now dying naturally of age and illness, and humanity mourned them. Snippet passed away quietly 16 months after Joran enrolled him in the continuation program, curled up in the same bunk where he'd spent years stealing snack bars and learning tricks. Joran held him through the final hours, whispering, "Thank you and I love you, and I'm sorry you were made to be a weapon when you were always supposed to be this." The memorial service at Petra's lab was attended by 48 people. Crew members from the Perseverance, civilians from Meridian, researchers studying Raxling behavior, and Admiral Harrington himself, bringing Echo and 3 other elderly Raxlings to say goodbye to one of the first. They placed Snippet's genetic profile, behavioral records, and a holographic memorial on the wall alongside 63 others, first-generation Raxlings who'd survived Swarm Day, been socialized by humans, and lived out their lives as companions rather than weapons. "They were supposed to end us," Petra said during the service. "Instead, they showed us what we're capable of. Not just survival, but transformation. Not just defeating our enemies, but healing from what they tried to do to us. Every Raxling that found a home with a human family represented a victory against the kind of hatred that creates weapons like this. Snippet was one of the first. He won't be the last." In the audience, Felix quietly recorded the ceremony for the historical archive, while his own Raxling, a second-generation female named Clarity, watched with the solemn attention that suggested understanding, if not comprehension. The Kytharii, monitoring human cultural developments with the resigned attention of a species learning to accept humiliation, noted the ceremony in their intelligence reports. General Threxus, reading the analysis, felt something approximating respect for the strange mammals who turned their grief into remembrance and their remembrance into legacy. "They mourn their enemies' creations," his cultural advisor observed. "No," Threxus corrected, "they mourn their friends. That's why we lost." 3 years after the war ended, the Galactic Council commissioned a comprehensive study on the Raxling integration event, as it had come to be formally known. The study analyzed everything: casualty rates, economic impact, psychological effects, diplomatic ramifications, and the long-term sustainability of human-Raxling cohabitation. The conclusions were simultaneously mundane and extraordinary. Economically, Raxlings had become a significant industry in human space. Pet supplies, veterinary care, training services, breeding programs, all generating revenue that helped offset the costs of the war and reconstruction. Psychologically, bonded Raxlings had proven beneficial for individuals processing trauma from Swarm Day. The act of caring for creatures that had once been threats provided closure, purpose, and tangible evidence of survival. Diplomatically, the event had fundamentally altered humanity's position in galactic politics. They were no longer supplicants seeking council protection. They were peers, having demonstrated both military capability and cultural resilience. But the most interesting finding was in the xenosociological analysis authored by a doctoral candidate named Lyra Fentworth and endorsed by Dr. Petra Whitmore. The Raxling integration represents a case study in humanity's most distinctive characteristic: aggressive mutualism. When presented with a threat, most species respond through elimination, avoidance, or subordination. Humans uniquely pursue a fourth option: integration. They transform threats into assets, enemies into allies, weapons into companions. This strategy carries risks. Not every threat can be neutralized through befriending, but when successful, it creates exponential advantages. Each Raxling that bonded with a human became both a neutralized threat and an active asset, contributing to human society while simultaneously preventing it from contributing to human destruction. The Kytharii's mistake was not in engineering a biological weapon. It was in engineering a biological weapon capable of social bonding and deploying it against the one species that specializes in social bonding. In attempting to exploit humanity's emotional vulnerabilities, the Kytharii actually created 9,000 opportunities for humans to do what they do best: turn strangers into family. The report was well received, cited extensively, and completely failed to capture the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of what actually happened in homes and ships and stations across human space. It couldn't capture Tessa Calloway teaching Cypher to identify faulty relays, their wordless partnership preventing disasters through learned collaboration. It couldn't capture the thousands of children who grew up with Raxlings, learning to read their body language, respect their needs, and understand that different didn't mean dangerous. It couldn't capture the veterans processing trauma by caring for creatures that represented their worst fears, transformed into daily responsibilities. It couldn't capture the quiet moments, Raxlings purring in laps, stealing food with practiced stealth, playing fetch in zero gravity, sleeping peacefully beside the beings they'd been designed to destroy. Numbers and analysis and diplomatic consequences mattered, yes, but they weren't the story. The story was simpler and more profound. Humanity survived by being human. On Keth Prime, in the contemplative retirement facility where former Dominus Kurath spent his days reviewing the mistakes that had cost him power, there was a small viewing room with access to galactic communication networks. Kurath spent considerable time in that room, watching human broadcasts, trying to understand where his calculations had failed. The engineering had been perfect. The deployment had been flawless. The tactical analysis had been sound. By every logical measure, the Raxlings should have devastated human populations. But logic, he was learning, didn't account for humans. He watched videos of human younglings, children, playing with Raxlings, laughing as the creatures learned tricks or attempted to climb surfaces. He watched humans decorating their Raxlings with small garments, creating entire industries around aesthetic customization. He watched them mourning deceased Raxlings with genuine grief, establishing memorials and conservation programs. "They are insane," Kurath muttered in harmonics meant only for himself. Completely, incomprehensibly insane. But underneath that assessment was the uncomfortable recognition that insanity, when applied consistently across an entire species, became something else. Culture, strategy, strength. One particular video caught his attention. A human male, identified as Admiral Davin Harrington, sitting in a sanctuary surrounded by Raxlings of various ages. He was speaking to someone off-camera about the domestication process, and his words were translated into Kytharii harmonic language by automatic systems. "The Kytharii thought our tendency to bond with other beings was a weakness," Harrington said. "They tried to exploit it, but they missed the critical point. If you're going to weaponize someone's nature, you need to understand that nature completely. Humans bond. That's what we do. We bond with our families, our communities, our pets, sometimes even our enemies. The Raxlings were designed to infiltrate those bonds. Instead, they became part of them. That's not a weakness. That's adaptation." Kurath watched until the video ended, then watched it again, and again. He was trying to understand, but understanding required accepting that his fundamental assumptions about reality had been wrong. That strength didn't only come from rigid hierarchy and calculated aggression, that survival strategies existed outside the frameworks his species had developed over millennia. He would never fully accept it. His cultural conditioning went too deep. But in the quiet moments, watching humans play with the weapons he'd created, Kurath felt something approximating what humans called regret. Not for starting the war. The Kytharii had reasons, territorial concerns, legitimate strategic interests, but for underestimating his enemy, for seeing emotional creatures when he should have seen survivors, for designing weapons that bonded when he should have designed weapons that couldn't. The Kytharii had lost because they tried to weaponize humanity's greatest strength and called it weakness. That was the lesson. That was the failure. Kurath turned off the viewing screen and sat in darkness, contemplating empires that fell because they couldn't adapt, and species that survived because they never stopped adapting. Somewhere in human space, a child was naming a Raxling for the first time. Somewhere, a veteran was learning to trust again by caring for a creature that represented fear overcome. Somewhere, a family was mourning a deceased Raxling and celebrating its legacy through offspring that would continue the bond. The Kytharii had tried to destroy humanity with perfect biological weapons. Humanity had responded by adopting them as pets. In the end, that was the story. Everything else was just details. 5 years after Swarm Day, the galaxy had reached new equilibrium. The Kytharii Dominion, under General Threxus's steady leadership, had rebuilt its economy and diplomatic relationships. They remained a significant power, but operated with the cautious awareness of a species that had learned humility through defeat. Human space had expanded, not through conquest, but through reputation. Species that had previously seen humans as minor players now sought trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. The mammals who turned weapons into pets were considered valuable allies and dangerous enemies. Raxlings numbered in the hundreds of thousands now, spread across human colonies and stations. Fourth-generation individuals showed continued domestication markers, smaller size, more pronounced juvenile features, enhanced social cognition. Selective breeding had produced specialized lines, therapy Raxlings, working Raxlings, companion Raxlings. The species that had been engineered for genocide was now diversifying into dozens of roles within human society. On Luna, in the Meridian Memorial Sanctuary, Admiral Davin Harrington watched the sunset through real windows while Echo slept peacefully on his lap. She was 13 years old now, ancient by Raxling standards, and spent most of her time sleeping. But when awake, she still recognized him, still purred at his touch, still trusted him completely. "Hey, old girl," he whispered, scratching behind her auditory ridges. "We did okay, didn't we? You and me and everyone else, we survived." Echo purred once, a rattling sound that spoke of age and contentment in equal measure. They'd survived by being human, by refusing to let fear dictate their choices, by seeing weapons and choosing to see beings instead, by turning the worst thing that had ever happened to them into a relationship that defined a generation. Harrington looked out at Earth rising over Luna's horizon, blue and white and impossibly beautiful, and allowed himself something he rarely did: pride. Humanity had faced extinction and responded by making friends with extinction. That was ridiculous, impossible, completely insane, and it had worked perfectly.